case you don't know, I'm Pat Selwood, and I'm waiting to be replaced. Yes, Donna, still.
How about if you say succeeded? I feel better.
Oh,
You were succeeded rather than.
I would love to be succeeded. Thank you, Elizabeth. Somebody could succeed me anytime.
We need more care.
Anyway, welcome. We are delighted to see you all here. Fred, you have the minutes for last year's meeting?
There were copies of the minutes on the back table.
Yep, there still are.
Is there anyone who hasn't received a copy? If you'll take a moment to read them.
Anyone like one?
I'll take one.
That's okay, I didn't realize that this was the annual meeting or anything, I thought it was a piece of fish about
Are there any questions?
Can we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, Don.
Name?
Second.
John Lawrence? Okay, then.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you, Cindy. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you very much, and thank you, Fred.
Got it.
Scarlett, financial report?
The financial report that I prepared is for the current month. And I can tell you that we had about $500 come in for memberships in the month of January. And we received an additional $32.50 for a book that we sold. And
That was a book that came to the book sale. And we figured that it was, Laurel helped us identify that it was worth more than 50 cents. So she put it online. And
so it was $32 more than 50 cents.
Yes.
And another check that we received this in January was $25 for the Scarecrow for a prize from the Chamber of Commerce for the work and
Susan.
Susan is our what do you call it? Our entries, our entries. So the balance in our checkbook currently is $24,131.33. And add to that our CD, we have total assets at my Five Star Bank, $28,866.64. During the last year, beyond expenditures for things like postage stamps and envelopes and that sort of thing, we made a donation to the staff Christmas party. We recognized volunteers for the library with $5 gift certificates to Seneca Farms in August, and we paid for the tour, the golf cart for the cemetery tour. And beyond that, we haven't spent a whole lot of money, but I would now like to make a motion to take off the table the possibility of donating $20,000 to the library for the landscaping.
That motion was tabled at last year's meeting because we weren't sure what was going on with the landscaping project. We were a little bit premature. So that is the motion that was made last year. So first we need to vote to take it off the table. So those in favor, please, aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, thank you very much. We now have a motion on the floor to have Scarlett write a check for $20,000 to the Penn Public Library Landscape Fund. Is there?
I so move.
Second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'll second it.
I second.
Elizabeth.
Oh, you did, okay.
All right, we have a motion and we have a secretary who likes the minutes to be accurate, so thank you. Those in favor of having Scarlett write a check, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you very much. We now have a couple of announcements. Fred, you have an announcement
Yes, I
about the
do.
budget vote?
I have a list here for people who would like to help us during the budget vote in April, fill in some time slots. So if I pass this around, would you mind filling in your name on one or more of the slots? the more people we have, at least we can have a backup. So let me just start right here and pass it around as we go along. Anyone who hasn't signed in, please do so because I will put that in the minutes. It is a Tuesday. Yeah, April 12th, Tuesday, April 12th is the budget vote.
And if you don't want to work, at least come and vote.
Right, please.
Workers are important, but voters are even more important. Yes, voters. If you're gonna vote no, then come on Wednesday. The only other announcement is one that every year the libraries in Ohio go to Albany to lobby for a day.
Not in Ohio.
Ohio?
Well, some things you just can't change. I've only been here for how many years? New York. New York. We go to Albany, not Columbus. And this year, the Advocacy Day is on the 2nd of March. It's a Wednesday. It's very important this year because, once again, the governor has proposed flat funding for libraries, the same as last year. Now, what that means is that we remain $10.9 million below what we should have gotten. That's in spite of a 5% increase last year. So the legislature has not been funding libraries based on the education law that is in effect. So we need to go and make a very strong case to Albany that not only do libraries need increased funding, we also need increased construction aid money. Construction aid is very, very important to our libraries, particularly some of the smaller ones, although we've benefited greatly from it. I serve on that committee of STLS, and last year we had about $1 million in requests, and we had $375,000 to cover them. So if that funding could be raised, we could begin to meet some of the basic construction needs in the community. All of that leads me to say, if any of you are interested in spending an entire day, and I mean an entire day, you can ask Susan or Alex that it is a long day, and I think Cindy's been too.
And so's Peter.
And Peter and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
But if anyone is interested, all you have to do is speak to Angela or me or Peter or anybody else around here, and we can get you registered. The delegates from this area normally meet in Painted Post or Horseheads and go on a bus and come back the same day. So it is a long day, but it is well worth it.
What's the date again?
March 2nd. March
You
2nd.
said March 2nd.
Wednesday, March 2nd. And it's not in Ohio. With that, unless there are any questions about anything else or any announcements for the good of the order.
The trip to Albany, is that going to be by bus?
By bus,
Yeah.
yes. Yes, and STLS provides the bus, so the only expense is your meals for the day. With that, I'm going to introduce Jim Crevelling. Some of you may remember him as Andrew Carnegie. However, today he is Jim Crevelling, not in disguise, doing, for us, what he spends the next several months doing, talking about maple sugar. Thank you, Jim.
So today I'm Andrew Carnegie pretending to be Jim Crevelling.
Okay.
So if I drop something, it's because I've forgotten my speech. Thank you for coming, and especially to all the library folks who put this together. When we favorite library folks is back there running the machine, and Sarah. And another favorite library person I'm married to over there. There's no way I could get out of here. So, before I get into this, some of you don't know who I am. So, how I got here was, I was born here, almost literally. My first home would have been halfway through the addition to the library. Back in those days, Hopkins Place went back here, there were 3 houses, and my parents rented the house closest to the street, which was kind of in the parking lot. So Sarah has, I think, in her office room a picture of these 2 little twerps. We played in the library yard. This was our first playground. And one of my very early memories is coming in the front door of the library, and there was this mountain of stairs. And right at the top of it was this really grouchy lady. And you had to be quiet all the time. So things have improved a lot. So the library plays a really important part of my life. It's literally been a part of it for all of it, I guess. So, when I left Penn in 1963, I wandered off to the Adirondacks to Paul Smith College. And it was there where I studied what was then affectionately known as terminal forestry. It's now called forest technology. One of the courses was minor forest products, and one of the minor forest products was maple syrup. So that's where it started for me, and then a few years later, I was working at the College of Forestry, where I put in 31 years, and I actually got paid to make maple syrup. It was one of the more interesting parts of my work. It's an alternate form of forest management. That was my shtick, I guess. I was a property manager for several of the College of Forestry properties, and we did forest genetics and research. That was all kind of neat, but I really got into maple syrup. I don't know why. It's one of those strange things that you fall in love with for no good reason. So more or less for 50 years, when I've had a chance, I've made maple syrup. So that's how we got here. Now another thing that I do in my retirement here is I'm one of the dearly departed players. And that's what they call the folks who roam around the cemetery in the fall and take on the role of some formerly prominent or infamous person from Penn. So a few years ago, I came here and did Andrew Carnegie, who was not buried here, but the library wouldn't be here without good old Andy. So I had fun doing that. And I'm using this as a segue into the next slide. So if you can just put that up, Sarah. And I guess we gotta turn lights up. So this is Pete Seeger, who is also dearly departed. That's the segue part. Pete, to a certain age group, obviously a folk hero, and among his many songs and music is one about maple syrup. So rather than me trying to tell some joke about maple syrup, Pete's going to sing about making maple syrup.
First, get the buckets ready, clean the pans and gather firewood. Late the weather, it's maple syrup time. You need warm and sunny days, but still a cold and freezing night time. For just a few weeks, maple syrup time. We boil and boil and boil and boil it all day long, till 97% of water evaporates just like the sun. But what is left is syrupy, don't leave it too long. Keep up the fire, maple syrup time. And I'll play. this system, but each year I can't resist it. Get out the buckets and tap the trees in time. Making it is half the fun, satisfaction when it's done. Keep up the fire, maple syrup time. My grandpa said perhaps it's just a waste of time. Ah, but no more than this attempt to make a happy little rhyme. So swing your tail or pat your feet, but keep it good time. Keep up the fire, maple syrup time. I'll send this song around the world with love to every boy and girl, hoping they don't mind a little advice in rhyme. As in life or evolution, rarely is there a quick solution. Anything worthwhile takes a little time. We boil and boil and boil and boil it all life long, till what is left is syrupy. Don't leave it on the flame too long, but seize the minute, build a new world, sing an old song. Keep up the fire, maple syrup time. Say now I'm with me, keep up the fire. Keep up the fire, maple syrup time. Oh, sing it again, everybody. Keep up the fire, maple syrup time.
Next slide, sir.
Just take it a second.
Here's the real introduction to my talk. That's a sugar house dog. Most of you have heard of Moose. Some of you may not have heard of the wheelbarrow. For those of you who haven't, Cindy insists on walking this dog who weighs more than she does. Now Moose is now 13 years old, and he's starting to slow down. But it used to be that if he saw something he wanted, he went after it. And it didn't matter what was on the back end of it. And she wouldn't let go. So after 2 or 3 relatively serious bumps and bruises, we hooked Moose up to the wheelbarrow. And then when Moose took off, he took off with that sea anchor behind him. And usually he stopped pretty soon. So that's just a way to introduce it. That's a sugar house dog. Moose loves sap. So he'll come, he's in the sugar house with us all sugar season, and if he gets a chance, he'll empty the buckets. What this really is about is what you see behind the dog and the wheelbarrow. This is a neighbor's sugar bush. This is not ours. This is Scott Road. We live on Scott Road up on the bluff. It's a dirt road, and you can kind of tell it's out in the woods. Sugar bushes right on the roadside are the best ones to have, because when the sap runs really well, those buckets can fill up a couple of times in a day. They're 9-quart buckets. So if you just want to keep in memory, you see these buckets scattered through here. Also, the number of trees and the size of trees. This is going to keep coming up as I talk. I'm a forester by training, and that's what I spent 31 years doing, and I'll go bonkers talking about trees, so you may have to hold me down when I get going. But here's Moose saying, "Welcome to the sugar bush." So let's go to the next slide, Sarah. All those buckets you saw are hanging on what we call a tap. Now a tap goes into a drilled hole in a tree. This tap is a kind that we use on all of our trees. It's very small. I'll pass this around. There are many, many different kinds of taps. Here's a bag full of different ones that you might like to see. The whole idea of the tap is to get the sap out of the tree. Not only do you have to get it out of the tree, you have to get it in some kind of container where you can collect it and then gather it and boil it. This tap that you see is called a tree saver tap. It's very small, 5/16 of an inch in diameter. The idea is you don't injure the tree nearly as much as you would with a full-size tap. when we drill the tree. So there's what I tap the trees with. That's a 5/16 inch diameter bit. Normal size is more like 1/2 inch to 3/4. Back in the 90s, there were some serious ice storms that you probably remember. It really raised Cain with a lot of sugar bushes around the state. Forest Service does a lot of research, U.S. Forest Service, and Cornell University too, does a lot of research on maple syrup. And they came up with what they call these tree saver taps, much smaller so that you can tap a much smaller tree.
I know what you mean, sir.
The conventional wisdom for tree tapping is no tree smaller than 12 inches. With these special taps, you can go down to 8. It was a way to replace the trees lost in those ice storms. You can do that without damaging the tree. Now, when you're taking sap out of a tree, basically you're taking the blood out of the tree. Just like taking blood out of your arm. You can take some, but if you take too much, it's not going to do you any good. So the idea with these taps is to take a lot less, not harm the tree, and if it's done right, you can do it for the next 100 years with no harm to the tree. These are a traditional tapping system. It looks nice on the calendars. A lot of people still do it. I prefer, and we use as much as we can, a plastic tap. This goes into the tree, and then through a system of tubes, let me see here, where we go, there we go. This would be on the, get somebody to be a tree here. This goes on into the tree, and then the tubing goes on to another container downhill somewhere. Gravity is real important in the system.
Yeah.
So that's Pinky. So I prefer the tubing. This is kind of a one-shot deal. A lot easier, a lot less work, and the older I get, the more important that is. Okay, Sarah, next slide, please. Here's another picture, one of our sap buckets. Dare I say it's this one. You can't really tell me I'm wrong, they all look alike. But that bucket is hanging on a spile in the tree. Obviously, you can see the importance of top. Rain, snow, bugs, chipmunks, squirrels, all kinds of things get in sap buckets. So it's important to keep it as clean as you can. Did I say chipmunks? I did.
Somebody said moose.
Moose wood. Got the chance.
It doesn't keep the bears out though.
If, what we used to do, it's tedious work. My first sugar bush that I worked in had no tubing. It had 700 buckets. So we'd start before daylight, and we'd finish gathering about noon, and usually it was on snowshoes in very deep snow. Pretty tedious work. And to just get rid of the boredom, we gathered all the things that drowned in the sap. Mice and chipmunks, and we bring them out. You can't waste that stuff. You know, you're working too hard to get it. And then we would line them up on the hood of our truck. So by the end of the season, we'd have 20 or 30 mummified mice or chipmunks. It's where the color from the syrup. So here's our bucket, and here's the sugar house. One thing you ought to notice here is that this tree is not really uphill of that sugar house. That's why we used the 25 or 30 buckets that we have. Some of those trees had the nerve to grow on the wrong side of the hill. But they're good producers, so we'll tap in that number of trees, and then usually that's Cindy's job. When I get going in the sugar house, I can't leave it. And Cindy's out there in pleasant weather like this, falling down together in all the buckets. Next slide, please, Sarah. I like this picture. This is more or less out our kitchen window. Matter of fact, our picnic table usually sits right here all summer, and this big, beautiful maple tree gives us wonderful shade, and you can see 3 buckets on it. That tree is actually big enough for 4. You can take that much sap out of a tree that size without causing any permanent damage. And if you look over here, now Sarah, where'd she go?
Quiet the kids down.
Hey Sarah, if you're not yelling at kids, could you enlarge this picture?
Sure. Whoops. In theory, I
Oh,
can.
that's really exciting. That's great, thank you, thank you. What I like about this picture is you can see a couple of mixed technologies here. One is the buckets, they've been around forever. History of maple syrup is all right here in the Northeast. You can only make maple syrup where maple trees grow. Maple trees only grow from Ontario down to maybe the hills in Kentucky or Tennessee, out west, maybe into Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then all the New England states. But it's pretty limited range worldwide. So when the first Europeans showed up here at the first Thanksgiving, they probably brought some maple syrup that the Native Americans were making. No one really knows how the Indians stumbled onto making maple syrup. There's some wonderful stories, but who knows? Somehow, sap came out of the tree and it got cooked, and somebody tasted it and said, let's do this again. And at least in the Onondaga Nation, part of the Iroquois Confederacy, they actually have one of their first spring festivals is memorializing the production of maple syrup. They would go into syrup camp. So when the Europeans showed up here, they got maple syrup along with whatever else they got. And we, over the years, we've continued to make it. It used to be one of the two sweeteners that you could actually get because there were no stores. That would be honey or maple syrup. And mostly the syrup was cooked down to sugar. And there actually is a local historical connection to that. The main tributary into Cuba Lake that goes through Branchport is known as
Sugar Creek.
Sugar Creek. Yeah, and that's from all the maple syrup that came out of the Guyanoga Valley, according to the history from 1875, I think.
The big gully that goes up
Right.
from Guyanoga up along Belknap Road.
Right.
Used to have a sugar bush in there that ran over 1,400 taps,
Yeah, yeah. There's
and that's back before too big.
in New York State, there's a great website, New York Maple Syrup Producers Association. You get on the website and you'll find all kinds of neat stuff, including some really good recipes. At least they sound really good. But according to their figures, there's over 2,000 maple producers in the state. I assume that's just people who belong. Other people, I don't belong. I'm not one of those. So there's a lot of people that make maple syrup. About somewhere between 2 and 3 million gallons of syrup are made in New York State every year. All depends on the weather. In the area where maple syrup is made, closer to 10 million gallons a year, most of that in Canada. Net worth $300 million to $500 million in any given year. So it's a pretty substantial crop. It's kind of neat and cool and all that, but it is a business. It is a business, and people who are serious about it, which we are not, it's a serious business. We try to have more fun than work all night. I don't like working all night anymore.
So what is that thing?
So what you've got here is the old technology right here, the buckets. Newer technology is right here. You can see the white barrel. Can you see the tubing
Oh,
that runs from it? What you can't see, which is not in the picture, to the southern, this is looking west from our kitchen. On the southern exposure to our house, there are these 12 gorgeous maple trees, roadside maple trees. They're probably this big around. These big, beautiful crowns. And they're my best sap producers, which stands to reason because they're big, open-grown trees. Lots of leaves. Leaves make the sap. We're going to talk about that a little later. Now, Sarah, can you swell that picture up again? Sorry. One more thing I want to mention. You can see that white barrel. Well, all the sap that we get here, that's a 40-gallon barrel. That barrel can be 3/4 full in 12 hours when the sap is really running. I think there's 35 taps in these trees. Well, all this sap has to get all the way down here to that white barrel. Can you see that? Just barely. Most of our sugar bush is within the wood line. Our property is about 22 acres. About 15 acres is in the woods, downslope from the house. Well, there's no tubing that goes from there to there. So we make lots of trips down to this point, which is at the top of our tubing system. Our tubing system starts where the trees are closer together, and there's about 2,000 feet of tubing. The sugar house is probably 300 feet down in the woods. Most of that sap flows by gravity through a tubing system down to the sugar house, and we're going to see that in a minute. Some of it doesn't. So the morning starts gathering the sap out of these buckets, out of the barrel. Anybody who doesn't want to have a gym membership, who wants to walk through snow or mud on snowshoes with 80 pounds of sap, grab a bucket. That's how the days start. Okay, sir. Well, we have to tap in. That's how the holes get in the trees. That's what I'm doing here. This is one of those 12 trees I was talking about, just on the southern edge of our house. If you look right there, that's some of Bob Morrison's grapes right across Scott Road. What you can see here is this tubing system. It's on a slight angle. When I put these up, I try to put them up about waist high, because there's a drop line from the point where the spile goes into the tree to where the sap actually gets into the tubing. So this tree is big enough to take 4 taps. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm just drilling that hole there. There's our tapper. I much prefer this to the old brace and bit. This looks really good on a calendar. And it's not so bad when you can do this. But when you gotta do this, I don't like it. I don't like it.
You do it 500 times.
Back in the old days, when I was working on that sugar bush with 700 buckets, we actually invented a tree tapper that worked off a chainsaw motor, which worked really good, but there was no governor on it, so you had to be real careful, because it would pull you right through the tree. These are great. We have a total of just over 200 taps. I need to use 2 batteries to get through those taps. We're going 2 inches into rock maple. It's hard work on a drill. So I take 2 batteries and a backup. So we drilled a hole. It's about 2 inches deep. That allows the tap to go in all the way. You want to seal all around it so it doesn't leak. And there's a bit of a reservoir behind the tap so that it can kind of fill up, and then the sap can run out and go on down the tubing. Next picture, Sarah. Okay, this is the real technology part. What do you think I'm doing? I didn't realize how weird that was. The drill, the holes that we drill.
There.
The holes that I drill, there ends up being some debris from the drilling process, and you have to clean that out. If you don't, it can plug up these lines. These are pretty small. These are about 1/4 inch, this tubing. So it can plug up pretty easily. So I use a piece of tubing and I'm just blowing out each hole. I also have a little wire auger that I can reach in and pull it out with too. Now, if you look right there, it seems to be running away from me. That's an old tap hole. There it is. Now, you can only use a tap hole for 1 season. You never can tap it over again. It'll never give sap again. So every year you're tapping new wood. This fills up with scar tissue for all practical purposes. So every year it's a new hole. you have to be careful on where you tap. If you get one too close, a new hole too close, like right above, it's gonna be dry. The sap is in the tree in what's called cambium. I don't know where you are, if you didn't take silviculture or botany or any of that stuff. Cambium is a real thin growth layer. It's just under the bark. It's only a few cells thick. There's two types of plumbing in it, xylem and phloem. Sap goes up, sap goes down in that very narrow layer of cells. The rest of that tree, for all practical purposes, is dead. It's non-living. It's not really dead. It's non-living. So that's why you're only tapping into the tree about 2 inches or so. Okay, Sarah, next slide. Sometimes gravity, we have to create our own gravity. Cindy is on a ladder, tapping, this is the top end of one of our lines. This is the first tree at the top of the hill. And in order to get enough slope, she's up on the ladder to do it. Now, if you look behind her, you can see some tubing right there. There's some more over here. This particular line, this is down in the woods, past that field that we saw earlier. This is a 4-tapper, you can see that. This is the start of the line, and this tubing is on wire. I'm not sure you can see the wire very well. The tubing in our sugar bush stays up year round. I've got a series of metal fence posts. I put wire on it and then hang the tubing on it. That tubing stays there year round. It doesn't come down. Saves a lot of work. It creates some work too, as you can imagine. Last couple of days I was putting the sugar bush together, which means repairing breaks. Mostly it's from tree limbs coming down. I've never had a problem with squirrels, mice, deer. The deer run right under the tubing. It's amazing to watch them do it. Once in a while, a tree branch will do damage, but we have very, very good luck with it. This tubing that you see here has been up for 12 years. It's starting to get old and brittle, and so am I.
Do you have to flush it?
Yes. Making maple syrup is the easiest part of this process. That's about 6 weeks. Those holes dry up in 6 weeks, more or less. It's just, you wounded the tree, it heals. You got 6 weeks to make syrup. Takes me 3 months or more on one side or the other, a syrup season, to get ready to do it. So the tubing is washed in place. I have a portable gas pump, and I cobbed up this Rube Goldberg rig, and I just use pressure to run a general bleach solution, not too strong bleach solution, through the whole system. Then I seal it up. It's theoretically airtight, and then I'll let that sit for a day, drain it out, then I'll flush it with plain water, and then button it up for the year. Works pretty good. It was kind of neat to come together with that system. It cost me about $75. A tubing washer costs about $400. So I have a lot of fun scrounging parts and trying to figure other ways to do things, and sometimes I drive myself and Cindy and Sarah nuts. Usually this time of year I'm half crazy. Next picture, Sarah. Okay, there we are, back up at the house. I want to show this picture because here's this tree with the 3 buckets that you saw from the other side. So there's our kitchen window. So as I say, that tree is right outside our window. Cindy is tapping in to one of the trees in the line. What I want to show you here is this magnificent maple tree. The size of the crown. The top of the tree, us foresters call them crowns. Okay. This is an open-grown tree. It's as old as the house, which is give or take 150 years. Because it's grown in the open with no competition, it looks like a great big pumpkin. And most of these trees in this row look like that too. The advantage to that is that crown has several thousand square feet of surface area on the leaves. Probably each leaf is probably a square foot. And I have never counted the leaves. There are at least 45 million of them in the fall when I have to clean them up. I mulch them, I wouldn't rake them for nothing. Because of this crown, because the tree is grown in the open, it's the perfect maple syrup tree. That's why roadside trees make the best maple syrup trees. Biggest crowns equals the most sap. Most sap means you don't have to go tap 25 other trees to replace this one. 3 buckets on this one as opposed to 3 trees with 1 bucket each. A lot less work. There's a row of 12 right along here. You really can't see the row. These trees, perfect maple trees, they're the worst lumber trees in the world. If I was growing a tree to produce lumber, the perfect tree would be square, would have no bark and no branches. There's no waste at all. It goes to the mill and you've got board after board after board after board. Instead, this tree is almost all branches. So it's perfect for maple syrup, not much good for lumber. But if you figure the value of that syrup over 100 years, it's going to far exceed the value of that tree were it perfectly square with no bark and no branches. Loggers, when they come into an old sugar bush, or they know there's a sugar bush there, they're going to what they call short butt the trees. That means they're going to cut off the bottom 6 or 8 feet because probably there are tap holes in it which are going to degrade the lumber, not to mention some of those old steel taps. And when a head saw, a sawmill saw, hits one of those old steel taps, you're going to replace the saw. So they don't like to do that. So they throw away the bottom part of the tree. There's not much left after that. Good firewood, great firewood. Maple is a very valuable tree as a lumber product, wonderful furniture. I spent 3 years trying to find a new place to live after I retired from the College of Forestry. And I didn't really care about the house. I wanted to find the maple trees. And I think Sarah will remember when we drove over the hill on Scott Road to look for this. We found this house and we went in the woods first, right? See, I go a little nuts when I make maple syrup. The house I just kind of hold together. Okay, next picture, Sarah. This, just wanted to give you a view of a tree that isn't so open grown. Obviously, we're putting a cap in, but you can see how much smaller the diameter is than the previous trees. Also, here's the crown for this tree. Over here is an adjacent tree. Here's another adjacent tree. They're pushing the tree. They're crowding it, so the tree is forced to grow up rather than out, so you get a smaller crown. That's where the forest management of this process comes in. You can thin out your sugar bush in such a way as to promote the growth of the leaves or the crown, which is the exact opposite of what you do if you want to grow it for lumber. But over time, you can create bigger crowns in your sugar bush, which is what I'm in the process of doing in ours. Is that our next slide into the... Okay, here we are down in our wood lot. This is just into the edge of the woods. Cindy is gathering sap. You can see this tree here, and then over here there's one tree there, there's another one over there, just ran away. There's another bucket over there, and there's a little path that goes back in here. This time of year, if you work in the woods, this is called mud season, and it's really not too bad this year yet. But this is a little swale that drains the field above it, so we put this little footbridge in. You're knee deep in mud or something all day long anyway, but this kind of slows it down. So Cindy's gathering sap. Next slide, Sarah. All that sap has to end up down at the sugar house. That sugar house from where Cindy was standing is 300 or 400 feet downslope. Most of our sap gets there through a series of tubing. You can see this one, and it goes right into that tank. And then there are those trees that grew on the wrong side of the hill. And that's what Cindy is dumping there, is one of the buckets from gathering sap. Now, up at the other end of this tubing, if you'll, next slide, Sarah. I'm dumping sap into that little white tank that we saw in that earlier slide that's right down on the edge of the woods. That's at the top of our tubing system. What I want to point out here is sap, first of all. I don't know if any of you have seen sap. Basically water. It has to have a pretty high sugar content to even taste the sugar in it. They say 2%, 2.5% sugar is kind of an average. Our sugar bush average is about 3%, so it's a nice sweet bush, but it still looks like water, pretty much tastes like water. We have gathered from that row of trees where you saw Cindy working, and then we dump that sap into this tank. This is a homemade filter to get the bugs and blood and such out of it, so it doesn't plug up the lines. Behind and downhill, you can see rows of tubing. This blue line runs basically down a stream drainage, which is the low part of the slope. Slopes are on either side of the drainage. And then tubing runs in what they call, it's like a dendritic pattern. The main line is at the lowest point and lines come in from each side. So on this system, there's probably 150 taps. Our system is about 200 taps. That's how you measure the size of a sugar bush. It's the number of taps, not number of trees. So we have about 200 taps. So most of the sap goes downhill 300 or 400 feet and ends up in the sugar house. Next slide, Sarah. I like this picture because this shows kind of a combination of systems again. Here's the buckets. This is a big old tree way downhill from the sugar house. Here's one of the main lines. This is also below the sugar house, so it empties into this smaller tank. And then right here, below the blue line, is another line. This has 3 trees on it, and they go right into a bucket. All this sap has to be gathered and carried by hand up to the gathering tank. We'll see that next picture, Sarah. That's the gathering tank. All the sap that we gather has to end up in this tank. This is uphill of the sugar house, and I built up this mound to create a slope because all the sap has to run from here into the sugar house, into the evaporator by gravity. So this, can you see the sap line here on the bottom of the tank? Did I do that? I was given this tank by a friend. Like I said, I like this scrounge. So what we do, I tip this tank up on one side so it's not flat. It looks flat from this end. It holds about 425 gallons. I don't think we've ever had more than maybe 250 or 300 gallons in it. That's a long day's work for us. So, and I don't like working all night anymore. Maple syrup is one of these nutsy things. You go and you drop and then you keep going some more. I don't do that anymore. So you can see the main line coming in. It goes into this tank on the other side. Might want to look at the wood pile here. There's another one up here. We heat with wood, although we just have supplemented that with a fancy new air-to-air heat exchanger that I'm really impressed with, because cutting wood keeps getting harder and harder. But over the years, I have thinned out this sugar bush. This was 50 years ago a pasture. What seeded in the maple trees all around here were those 6 big trees, one of which you saw Cindy standing on a ladder. They were the parents for this 5 or 6 acres. Almost entirely sugar maple. There were some other trees in it. There are still a couple, but I cut most of them out, and we heat with that. So that's the firewood you see. I usually cut that wood in December after deer season's over and finish up in time to make maple syrup. Next picture, Sarah. So this must be a new movie. Oh, okay, the sugar house, all right. The purpose of all this is to get the sap from the tree down to the sugar house. And you can see the tubing and everything going downhill. There's the tank right there. There's a backup tank if I need to use it. I try not to use it for sap. Sap has a short half-life, 12 hours is, or less, depending on the weather. So if you get it, you almost have to boil it. It'll degrade very quickly, especially later in the season. So this sugar house we built, Sarah, Cindy, and I, it's 12 foot by 20, pole barn construction. You can see the cupola on top. You need to open that up, get the steam out. Has a 10 by 12 foot woodshed on the back. That's kind of important, as you can imagine. So it's where it is because it's downhill for most of the maple trees, and I wanted gravity to do as much of the work as it could. That's not the only reason it's there. Making maple syrup is sticky work, and it's really good to have a source of water to clean up. So what you can't see is over the hill here, there's a little spring. And every year I go down and dig out that spring and I put in an old sewer pipe, clean sewer pipe, that empties into a tank, and I have my water source. Then I have a small portable gas pump. I'll pump the water up to the sugar house. I have a reservoir in the sugar house where I keep about 50 gallons of water that I have for cleaning up and for emergency use, which I'll explain later. When cleanup season starts, I'll fill this tank with that water. I'll set my pump here, and then that's how I'll clean the whole system, right from there. Next picture, Sarah. Well, there's the energy supply for the sugar house. This is 12 feet by 10. We use, that holds about 5 full cords of wood. And that's enough probably to make 60 gallons of syrup. We've made, and it all depends on the weather, over the last 11 years, we have made somewhere between 18 and 50 gallons of syrup. The weather really makes a difference. We average about 32, which is kind of right in the middle. So there's plenty of wood there. This wood comes mostly from my friend and vineyardist, Bob Morse. Bob's always losing grape posts. He replaces them every spring, and I get all the ones that break off. And it is magnificent sugar
A lot of
wood.
it's also,
A lot of it is cedar, because cedar is a very resistant wood to rot. These posts break off right at the ground line. So you probably got 6 feet of wood out of most of them, some of them more. We also have a lot of locust, and locust is super, that's the best.
high speed to use.
Yeah. So I take what I get, and I really don't mind. The way I run my evaporator, and we'll talk more about this later, is I'm putting wood in every 10 minutes from the time I start till I'm done. So the faster it burns, the better. That doesn't bother me a bit. So the softwood is really, really hot, burns really, really fast. Get longer fire out of the locust, really, really hot.
Does the lumber affect the taste of the syrup?
I'm sorry?
Does the lumber have an impact on the taste of the syrup?
I don't think so, Fred. It's been one of those things that I've been making maple syrup off and on for 50 years, and I've always used wood. I don't really know if oil, the fossil fuels, oil or gas are used. I've been told that it does affect the flavor. I don't know why it should. If the wood doesn't, I don't know why the oil or gas would. But I like using the wood. Obviously, it's a lot more work. That's part of that 3 months I was talking about. Every year I'm cutting that stuff up. But there's an emotional component to making maple syrup that using wood goes with, I guess. At least it does for me. If I was in it to make money, if I was running it as a business, I probably wouldn't do it. But I have no problem with people who do it. It's just different ways of doing things. Okay, Sarah? Same, it's a little bit different view. Now you can see we're working. Cupola's opened up, steam's coming out. Here's the woodshed. This is a different year. Here's some tubing here for other little lines that were below the sugar house. You see that black tubing right there? And that's how the sap is running into the sugar house. Next picture, Sarah. Okay, now we're inside the sugar house. You can see back here is that green storage tank. Here's the spare tank. This is the evaporator. This is the heart of the sugar house, obviously. There's woodshed back there. That's my brother's arm holding up the sugar house. Our evaporator, they're measured by the dimensions. This is a 2x6, 2 feet wide, 6 feet long. There are 2 pans, they're called. This is the front pan or the sap pan, and completely separate but connected by valves is the syrup pan. This is 2 feet square. Sap is coming in on the opposite side of the sap pan at the very back. It flows up through the tubing system that you saw, and it runs into a separated preheating pan in the back of the sap pan before it flows down to the front through a pipe where it enters on the side of the evaporator at this point. This is a flue pan. It's called a raised flue. It's not flat. There are 7.5-inch deep flues. It's like a radiator in reverse. So what you've got are, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 compartments across the width of this. Each one is separated from the other one. The sap has to flow through all those flues, cross over at the front, go to the back, cross over, go to the front. So you've got this tremendous surface area for evaporation. I can start, this holds 30 gallons, give or take. I can start a fire, and within 15 minutes, I've got a rolling boil, 30 gallons, and it can be 20 degrees outside. And it might take me 20 minutes because I have to go a little bit slower because it's frozen. I have to thaw it out. It's rated at evaporating 30 gallons an hour. So the big systems, the last one that I designed a sugar house and we built it, and I put in an $11,000 evaporator that was rated at 300 gallons of sap an hour. So this thing is chicken feed. It's built the same way, it operates the same way as the larger commercial pans. That sap has to travel through this pan back and forth, back and forth. It's probably 75% syrup by the time it crosses out of that pan into the front pan. This is a syrup pan. That's controlled by a valve. In this part of the pan is a float. And that bobs up and down, and it lets in more sap or less sap to equal the amount of steam going up. The amount of sap coming in the whole system is controlled by another float over on this side. So in a perfect world, you're maintaining an equal level of sap in these pans as it's going off of steam. Now I say in a perfect world because it never works that way. The sap in this pan is probably 8 inches deep because of those flues. In this pan, it's about 1 inch deep. You can burn that off in minutes. If you get a freeze up in the line, if anything stops working right, you just kiss $3,000 goodbye. That's the reason we have a water tank over here that I spoke of earlier. So if Murphy strikes and things work right and everything is thawed out, I can get water into the pans very quickly. This is part of the whole process. In order to make syrup, I need about 100 gallons of syrup, of sap out here. That's because it takes an hour for the fire to die. So I have to plan on stopping making syrup when I've got enough sap left in there to replace what's going to evaporate off while the fire dies. That's when it's nice to have an on and off switch on those oil burners, which we don't have. Cindy's seen me do some pretty strange things when I try to push it too far. Next slide, Sarah. There's the business end of the evaporator, and it's 5 o'clock, so I'm going to speed this up a little. This firebox holds 24-inch wood. The depth of it is about 2 feet. In other words, this syrup pan is where all the fire is. The heat from that fire has to travel underneath this raised flue sap pan all the way to the stacks before it gets out. You have a better view here of the containers where the sap from the front pan flows into the syrup pan, and there's part of the float system that bobs up and down. This is all reproduced on the other side of the pan. This whole system is reversible. So it'll flow, one day it'll flow north to south, the next day it'll flow south to north. That's kind of a self-cleaning process. You just do that by changing the piping around in the sap pan. There's what's called sugar sand and syrups. Anyone ever heard of that? As you concentrate the sap, you saw the picture how nice and clean it was. Well, as you cook it down, it concentrates everything that's in it. And what's in it are a lot of magnesium, potassium, sodium salts. And that precipitates out as sugar sand. It also, it's what's turning the sap color too. So by reversing the flow, you can kind of keep those pans clean. You never make syrup day after day after day after day. The season might be 6 weeks long, but a long season for us would be 15 boils. So there might be a 2 or 3 day break between boils because you get a cold snap, the sap won't run if it doesn't get up above freezing. Or if it stays too warm, it won't run, so you've got to wait for it to get cold. So there are times when I'll just strip this and clean it all right in the middle of the season. So the cleaner you can keep everything, the better the quality of the syrup. Next picture, Sarah. They say the watch pot never boils, and that's just what you're doing when you make maple syrup, watching the pot. There's another trick to that, and that's to keep track of the temperature. And if you can see here, the boiling point of water is marked as 0 on this thermometer. And as the sap boils, that temperature will raise. And sap turns to syrup at 219 degrees Fahrenheit, or 7 on this thermometer. Next picture, Sarah. So, the temperature is rising, and we're looking for 7, and about this point I get really nervous and jerky because it can happen really, really fast. Weather has a tremendous effect on how fast sap will boil. It always goes quicker from 0 to 7 than it does to get to 0. Once things get going and the weather's good, you can be making syrup probably every half an hour or 45 minutes. In our case, maybe you're going to make 3/4 of a gallon, maybe a gallon. That'd be real good. But some days it takes hours, and I couldn't tell you why. South wind seems to cause a problem. A low barometer causes a problem. I think it's like it's pushing on the sap and it just won't boil. But when things are going good, it'll get up to that temperature pretty quickly. Next picture, sir. As it goes, we keep track of the density. This is with a hydrometer. You can't see, I don't think, there's a red line right on that. And when that red line floats just at the surface, then that sap has reached the density to become syrup. That's when you know that it's syrup. The temperature is just an indicator. That temperature can actually change. You're supposed to zero your thermometers every day in boiling water. I don't ever do that. The hydrometer is right. This is the big operators. This is all done automatically. We're not big operators. We do it this way. Next picture, Sarah. Okay, now we're at 7. This thermometer is in that syrup pan, installed right in it, right into the sap. So it's at 7, and then we open the valve, draw it off, and we've turned the sap into syrup. So, next picture. There we are. We've taken it off, and we're pouring it through a combination of filters. There's a paper filter in there, and then a thick flannel filter. I've got all this stuff up here if you folks want to take a look when we're done. But if you look back here, here's some of that black tubing again. This is how the sap gets into the system. The reason we're filtering this is because syrup, when it comes out of the evaporator, looks more like muddy water than it does syrup. That sugar sand clouds it up. It's very cloudy, so it's not attractive at all. So it needs to be filtered. Next picture. That filtering station is also our canning station. This holds about 10 gallons if you could fill it all the way to the top, which we can't. We can get maybe 3 gallons in it, that would be crowding it, I think. The filters drop down about this far, they drip through. And this takes, a few minutes. And then we go from filtering it to canning it. So next picture, Sarah. There's another thermometer. This is installed in the canning device, and you can see that temperature. We get up around 200, safe canning temperature is about 190 to maybe about 210. You don't get any higher than that, you're going to burn it. But you want it hot because it's drawn off into containers. Next picture, Sarah. Cindy is canning right there, and this is hot work too, if you wonder why she's wearing her socks on her hands. Doesn't everybody do that? Once the can is full, what you do is you put the lid on. There's a self-sealing seal in there that the heat of the syrup seals onto the lid of the can, so that it is in fact sealed. Thanks, Lynn. And that's how you should get your syrup sealed. It's like honey. The most it'll do is mold a little. If it's stored a long time, you can heat it up, just skim the mold off, keeps forever. Next picture, Sarah. Last step in the process is to grate it. And yeah, that's a Sugar House dog, yeah. This system has actually been replaced by another system. Here's the sample jar here, and what you do is just a comparative colorimetric system. You just compare colors with these standards, and that's where your light, medium, dark grade comes from. As I said, that system changed last year. We'll be using the new system, which is less intuitive, more descriptive, I guess. This is a light amber, medium amber, dark amber, and below grade. That really doesn't tell you much, except color. The new system is more descriptive of the actual taste. And yeah, there's a Sugar House dog again, wondering why we're still here. So I'm done, so we can go home. So happy to answer questions. Sure.
How do you know when to start in the fall?
The process is really interesting, and will I offend anybody if I say I use the SWAG method? SWAG,
Yeah, it's fine.
scientific wild ass guess. There's more to it than that. You do this in the spring, early spring. The reason for that is the sap that you're turning into syrup is made the previous summer. That's why those leaves are so important. They're all little factories. They're making that sap, they're cleaning our air. In our case, they cool our house. We really enjoy sitting at our picnic table underneath that big maple tree. Wonderful multiple use things, trees. I like trees. Some of my best friends are trees. So in the spring, all the sap goes down the trunk in the fall, and actually you could make syrup in the fall, but it's a very short season and it's not worth all the trouble. So you wait until the spring, and what happens is the days get longer and warmer. There's a physiological response in the buds of the crowns, and what that is, that pulls the sap up the trees. So that's why the sap is coming up, and what we're doing is intercepting it as it starts to come up. You've got about 6 weeks before the buds swell to the point that their nutritional needs have changed. That changes the chemistry of the sap. It's perfect for the leaves, no good for syrup. It gets what we call buddy, and it's awful. Ugh, awful. So you have a 6-week window, and what you try to do is guess when you're going to get the best weather. That's below freezing at night, above freezing during the day, perfect sun, about 40 degrees would be great, thank you very much. And if you get that, you can maybe keep up with the sap. We call it a flood run, and it can run so fast the buckets just run over. You just can't get to them in time. Usually that doesn't happen. You'll make syrup for a day or two, and then you gotta wait for a day or two to get enough more to boil. So there's a lot of things that we don't control. The best you can do is anticipate the weather. I think AccuWeather does a nice job on long-range forecasts. That's what I'm looking at now, trying to guess when to start. But that 6-week window will be the final judge. Middle of April, the buds are gonna break, probably. So the latest I could start would be the end of February. Probably start before that. It's a guess.
How's this weather affecting?
Yeah.
It's going to
Well, I
affect
really,
things.
I don't think this winter per se is gonna have an effect on syrup production. Last summer was a marvelous growing season, you know, and we had apples and pears, and you name it, it just grew wonderfully. So the trees weren't stressed. When the trees are stressed, what they do is they kind of hunker down and make less sap. So they weren't stressed last year. We had lots of sap. The question is, what's the sugar content? And the sugar content, you can sort of guess, but it'll vary a lot too. When I was working at the college, waiting for the pot to boil, I actually set up a little research project on a side hill outside of that sugar house. There were 200 or 300 little maple trees about the size of my thumb or a little bigger. And I used an 1/8" bit and a micro pipette tubing for a spile. And I'd get 2 or 3 drops of sap, and I'd measure the sugar content with a refractometer. And I'd drill holes on the north side, east side, west side, south side. And I'd measure them at different times through the day. And they'd be all over the map. You'd never, the same hole wouldn't give the same sugar content twice. They might be a lot sweeter in the morning or in the afternoon. There was a consistency to the sweetness. So a tree that was sweeter one day would be sweeter the next day, but it would still be all over the map. I think it's microsite, the site where the tree grows, that I think makes the difference. And then there's a genetic component of the tree itself, which we don't even begin to understand. Yeah.
You've been doing this for 12 years. Have you seen any effect from global warming
Climate change?
and from acid rain?
First acid rain, no. The acid rain part of the environmental situation was much more severe in the Adirondacks than it was here. It did not affect maple syrup production. That's not to say that over time it won't, but in the time that I did it, I was making maple syrup, it did not. Here, down here in central New York, I don't think the acid rain would ever be a problem because we have a much more, the buffering capacity of the soil is much greater here because of the limestone bedrock. So the acid rain is buffered before it gets into the system. So I don't think we ever have that problem down here, unless acid rain got a lot worse. And that's not the way it's gone. Thankfully, the regulations have got a pretty good handle on that. As to climate change, that's a more interesting question. I don't think historically, there's not enough history of climate change that we have records, I think, to safely point at some problem with maple syrup production specifically. Part of it could be too that where we are in the range of the maple tree, we're sort of in the middle, you know, it goes down south, goes north. I think if it's going to show up, it'll probably be down south. What they say is the sugar maple's gonna have to migrate north. And it's gotta come a long way before we're on the edge. The timing for a tree to change where it grows, what is that? Maple tree's been around for millions of years. So I don't think that climate change will affect the production of maple syrup. The catastrophic storms may affect the production of syrup. In other words, the trees are gonna blow over or be destroyed. That'll affect it. So there's a lot of different things involved. It could be the warmer temperature will cause some kind of insect problem that could wipe out the trees. There's a lot of other things that could do it.
I'm gonna suggest that if anybody else has a question, you have a cookie and
Yeah.
talk to Jim then.
Nice talk, Jim.
We have
Once the stuff up here, if you want to look at it, I'm happy to, I'll talk about this till I drop.
Cindy, before we let people get up and get noisy, there are a couple things that she needs to tell you what they are.
Yeah, we've got a lot of food up here that has maple syrup and other maple products as part of their ingredients. And we've got a couple recipes too. There's a dressing, a marinade dressing where there's veggie sticks. And Dave Sheik, who has a huge maple syrup production over on Ridge Road, he happens to be the president of the New York State Maple Producers Association, and he generously gave us he makes some maple, this is maple sugar, got some little toast things you can sprinkle this on. He also gave us some maple candy spun like cotton candy that he makes, and that's here. And let's see, oh, maple cream. This is a maple cream, and there's football pretzels with that. And then we have our maple syrup. And this happens to be the zesty, the full body maple syrup. It's the darker. So you can get a sense of what that is. And then we have the angel food cake you can dip in there. Let's see, I guess. And there's some photos over here. And also Dave gave me a bunch of postcards. There's 2 maple weekends that I think it's the 3rd weekend in April, and then the 1st weekend in March. Easter comes between them, and it talks about it. The new grading system, he gave me these 2. So, feel free to sample everything and see the other stuff.
Yeah, I kind of dropped off one page here. I got out of that maple syrup website just so you don't think you have to have pancakes with your maple syrup. Listen to these recipes, and it's probably the wrong time to give them because it's supper time. Here's bacon wrapped scallops with a mango maple glaze. Barbecue maple pulled pork a la Glenora. I'm sure they've done that right down there. Best ever maple pie, chicken teriyaki, maple stir fry. Now, here's the one if you're really serious about losing weight. And I'm not making this up. Gluten-free, dairy-free, egg-free, ginger peach pie. I think they should have put in there taste-free. But that you can eat without guilt.
We also have some maple scones here too. Yes. Come on, enjoy.